so culture, leadership are, are like kind of foundational to this. Right? It all comes back to the same things. And I think, a lot of the dystopia kind of conversation throws those kind of messy things out of the window because we've been around for thousands of years, so who cares? But actually, that's the point.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And, Cam, I've forgotten his name. He was in the Bay Area. He coached us through our intro and outro. And now every time I say our intro, I think about what words am I emphasizing?
It's Bob King. Joy of Closing, working through his book right now. Those inflections. Yeah, you got it. Folks, go back, listen to all the intros and the outros, and pay attention to all those really great inflections that we have ever since Bob came on the show.
That's right. Thanks for that, Bob. Appreciate it.
It is funny. He really has permeated our subconscious with that. I do the exact same thing every outro.
Son of a bitch. I tell you what, man. He's in my head. I don't like it when people are in my head.
I can tell because you didn't wait your 2 minutes to swear. YouTube's going to be mad at us.
Bitch ain't a bad word. That's a female dog. Come on.
There you go. Well, as long as they watch the full episode and get context, which I know people always do, so we'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we hope. We hope, because they're just wondering what the hell Otis is going to say next. Is probably what they're.
I was going to say, yep. Go ahead and land that plane. Let's see the segue.
Yeah. Well, the segue is that we got our good friend Reece joining us, and Reece is doing something that I haven't run. I mean, everybody's flowing out. I was joking with somebody last night about integrating drones and AI into his tagline. Well, Reece, you've done it, and you're not just doing it for shits and giggles.
So we are doing it.
Tell us what in the world is going on, because everybody's running around. They're doing one of two things with AI.
Yeah,
they're either saying I'm the AI guy, or they're like, oh my God, Skynet is coming. Help us. Be the lesser of the two panicked people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Otis, Cameron, thanks for having me. And I've been really looking forward to this conversation. So I think my view on AI is it's not gonna be the utopia or dystopia. Every time there's a big innovation, it never quite pans out exactly as we expect, right? Like when Mark Zuckerberg was creating Facebook, he had no idea that it was going to grow and morph into the thing that Meta is now, right? The same thing probably with Airbnb, right? Did they really set out to kind of disrupt kind of housing economy and kind of the hospitality industry in terms of its economics? Probably not quite. I would say AI, is going to change, or is changing, like how we work, how we interact, et cetera, right? It's not a bold thing to say. I think it is short-sighted and kind of, taps into some moral panic that is going to completely replace us, right? I think when you look at human history, there's always been disruptive technologies, and they've always kind of pushed us forward. We've evolved socially, economically, politically to kind of adjust and incorporate them. I think kind of AI is just like the internet, in that it's going to get to a point where it's just everywhere and actually pretty kind of bog standard and uninteresting. Like, do we really get excited about the internet now? Not really. It's just something that we use every day, like our coffee machines. And I think AI is going to ultimately get to that point. Of course, there's risks, right? I think we have to think about how that tool and technology is applied. Can we ensure that we're using AI to kind of further human advancement, right? Education, understanding, connection, and how do we mitigate and manage like the misuses of that technology, right? So, you already mentioned kind of drones. Okay, we know where and how do we use it in kind of military operations. There's like one extreme. And then in my own little world where we I'm in the assessment business to help organizations identify, talent. How do we use AI there to give candidates a fair experience without, biasing them, and also mitigating the inherent human bias that kind of people have? So it's all about trade-offs. And it's nuanced. And as we all know, the world is great with nuance at this moment. So, I'm sure we'll be able to handle these things very smoothly.
Speaking of the nuance there, and our love for avoiding the nuance, as you hinted to, the thing that's interesting to me, and I want to take this from the business side a little bit to more maybe you personally, because I think this is a good piece. You talked about it's not the utopia, it's not the dystopia. Yep. Those are the two exciting things to talk about. That's why we talk about them all the time. Yes. You're over there going, "Hey guys, calm down. It's gonna be here." We joke happy medium. Maybe it's more of the boring medium in the middle there. And that's the reality of what's probably going to happen. I think it's a smart bet, but it's a little boring, like I said. How do you keep yourself on the boring rather than having fun with all the crazy stuff out there?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like it's on one hand, it's letting yourself indulge in the fun stuff, right? It is, of course, fun to think about, how we can do things differently and how we can innovate. Like, I think we're all entrepreneurs on this call, so that's where our brain goes. It's like, how can I disrupt stuff? How can I solve problems using this new tool and technology? And then, your brain can run away with yourself there. But I think it's around just trying to stay. Two things is in my mind. It's like, one, trying to stay abreast with the actual developments of the here and now tools, like how do they currently work, where are their edges, and kind of where do we think the next one or two generations of that technology, how they're going to evolve and what are they going to look like. But as well, I think it's about having a broader view of human history and human behavior. Like, how have we always operated and engaged as individuals, as communities, as nations, and kind of what are some of the cyclical patterns that happen there, right? And I think we can learn a lot about how AI will and will not kind of change the way that we move forward, right? Are humans going to continue to be emotionally irrational? Yes. Are we still going to be motivated by fear and greed and kind of security? Yes. Are we still going to be motivated by love, sex, drugs, and all those other amazing things that kind of
rock and roll?
Yeah, exactly. And yes, is the case there. So I think it's about not being a curmudgeon and being a Luddite, right? And nothing will change. That's stupid. It is changing. Things have changed. But the impact will not be as big as we think, and it will be bigger in ways that we can't even anticipate yet. And that's what's most exciting. The stuff that we're worried about is probably the stuff that won't happen because we're talking about it. We're thinking about it. We're putting stuff into place to support it. Like Scott Galloway, the professor at NYU, always talks about this. The things you worry about don't end up happening. It's the surprises that matter. And I think he's paraphrasing the journalist Morgan Housel, who wrote Psychology of Money and a few other books. He talks about this as well. And so if we think about how do you help organizations navigate AI adoption, it's actually doubling down on the things that you know to be true. And that's kind of people, that's teams, that's connections, that's leadership. And kind of continue to also just stay educated and experiment with technology and not put the cart before the horse, because it's people that's going to stay around. They always have, they pretty much always will. And we're not going to live in some Terminator style, dystopia. As fun as that could not be. I don't see that happening. Reality is far too boring to kind of go down that road.
Yeah. Well, you know what came to my mind when you were talking about this is the implementation of certain technologies, and I always go back to it was 15, 20 years ago when we thought blockchain was going to change the world.
Precisely. Yeah, exactly.
And it's hardly used other than the cryptocurrency, which still is flaky at best.
Yeah.
Do not invest unless you know what you're doing, people. But blockchain was supposed to revolutionize everything. Yeah. And where is it now?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I have not signed a blockchain contract. Have you?
Yeah, exactly. Completely agree on this. I think I totally agree. I think AI is different. I think the reason why AI is different is that you're absolutely right. Blockchain has like no meaningful consumer impact, right? Like I'm sure there are some people deep in that industry that like absolutely love it, and you're going to listen to this and they're going to think I'm an idiot, and that's totally okay. But I know,
well,
like,
just put your name right after Camden and Otis. And
yeah, okay, well, we'll all be idiots together. But I think the difference is like generative AI in particular, I think has found consumer adoption, right? And that has, I think, been the big breakout success of it, in that I know many people that are not necessarily like technologists or data scientists or anything like that, but they use ChatGPT or a large language model like every day to help them write emails, proofread, and things like that. And now they can't live without it. I know I can't. Like as a startup, like we're a lean industry, a lean team. I have to use AI to like close the gaps that we have. Like I don't have an infinite number of people. I can now use this tool to help me there. I think, so what am I trying to say? It's definitely not like a fad in the way that say blockchain or the metaverse like was, right? I think that is like absolute Silicon Valley peak fad behavior. But I would be kind of a bit more cautiously optimistic around, will AI really deliver on like all the money that's getting like invested in it, or will it just become like a really advanced assistant similar to kind of what we have now, right? And I think it's also worth kind of teasing apart like what do we mean by AI and the different variants or different types of AIs there are, right? I think because of ChatGPT commercializing, or being the first AI experience a lot of people have had, that's kind of their conception of it. But we've had machine learning, predictive models for a very long time, and they're kind of boring to most people because they're like optimizing systems and processes, right? Netflix, your recommendation is AI, but people don't really think about that. So we've been living in this AI age for a long time. Now many of us are kind of directly interfacing with it. And I can't see it going away. I guess the question is just like how well it can deliver on the promises that people like Sam Altman are making, which, depending on how I feel, on that day, I could change my opinion.
Well, I'd say it's one of the biggest differences between AI and blockchain is for lack of a better way of putting it, the graphic user interface, the GUI.
Yeah, of course.
Right? It's a common person tool that we're all familiar. I mean, very few people are unfamiliar with how to do an internet search.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really what AI requires, is a knowledge of how to type in a query. And a query is a really big word for saying, what does this mean?
Yeah. You touched on a really good point there, which is like, okay, like for all intents and purposes, we'll just use, when we talk about AI, we can just talk about generative AI and ChatGPT, because I think that's what most of your listeners will kind of resonate with. It's getting better, right? But to get good responses out of it, you need to be able to answer good questions. Now, that requires some human critical thinking, and requires some like actually core traits. Like, okay, what I'm trying to say is for us to kind of get the best out of AI and kind of integrate it and improve our lives and the way that we work and so on, actually requires us to kind of double down on, I think, some uniquely human qualities, right? Curiosity, the ability to kind of formulate and ask good questions. I think AI is going to be able to then give you the better answer. And AI is not going to form questions for you, right? Human ingenuity, I would say, isn't going away. And so how do you pair human ingenuity, that inquisitive nature, with, this amazing informational tool? Similarly, if you're conversing, to your point, Otis, around, the beauty of ChatGPT is like you can converse with it like a human. I would say, this is a hypothesis, so I'd have to do some research, and maybe your listeners can tell me otherwise. I would imagine more emotionally intelligent individuals are going to converse with their AI better because they can actually manage a conversation. They know kind of how to ask good questions and so on and so forth. And so all that's to say is, we can't ignore, these inherent attributes about what make us great and kind of the attributes that build great teams, great communities, great organizations, because those are the things that I think will help organizations benefit from integrating AI into their organizations. So culture, leadership are like kind of foundational to this. Right? It all comes back to the same things. And I think, a lot of the dystopia kind of conversation throws those kind of messy things out of the window because, we've been around for thousands of years, so who cares? But actually, that's the point. That is the point.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And, keeping in mind those human components like communication and those kind of things that they really touch everything. Dad, we make the joke all the time about rugby. It's like, okay, what do we need to do better? Communicate, coach. It's like, yeah, always. But that same thing goes in leadership. Like how much of leadership on a core level is just communication, being able to ask good questions, those kind of things. And that actually brings me to something I was thinking about, which is the application side of things we've been talking about and how exciting we can think about the crazy things and all that. But going back to the boring, to a lot of folks out there, not the three of us in this call, but communication, leadership, that can be in the boring area. We get excited about it. I'm just putting a smile on my face, but that kind of falls into that boring application where it's like, oh yeah, you made my leadership a little bit better. Like you're not throwing that up on a billboard or anything. You're not really getting people excited. There's no movie coming out about that, right? But that application is going to be where we're probably going to see most of these things coming out. Could you talk some about, your perspective with that application and the more like normal, the boring, and how that's because what you're doing is in that exact space and it's going to make a good impact, but it ain't selling t-shirts.
Yeah. Well, no, it's a good point, right? So it's okay. So my company, we provide organizations with like data about their candidates, their teams, their leaders, specifically about the way that they may behave, their kind of tendencies, the values, the way they interact. And so that data is used for like talent management purposes. And so we have a whole platform that does this. We more recently have just released a AI agent that you can converse with that takes into account that data and enables you to ask questions of it. Now, a big problem in our industry is we've spent the last kind of 20, 30 years giving lots of data to, talent leaders, HR directors, and so on. But we've made it very difficult for people to understand and action. How am I meant to know whether this person's going to be a good fit for a role? I need to build a succession plan. Who's going to be a better leader, or who is going to have like complementary skills with this team, et cetera, et cetera. And as you know, like that requires a lot of training, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge to be able to answer those questions right. And so what we've done using AI is build our own model that can take into account those different sources of data, understands like the scientific literature of talent and leadership. And then from there, you can actually get practical answers out of your data and know what you need to do next. And so I think this is an example of, I wouldn't say it's boring. I would say it's like one of those things that is making AI or making data accessible or making insights accessible, right? I think AI has a lot of potential. The challenge has been, and I think we're getting better at it, is like, how do you apply the technology to solve a problem, right? To your point, Otis, like blockchain was like a hammer looking for a nail. And I think what we're able to find with AI is that increasingly so, if we just focus on what problems we're trying to solve, right, which is being able to understand more information, make the information accessible faster, and ultimately make better decisions off of it. Well, AI can absolutely help there. And I'm sure there are many of other applications or problems that we can think of where AI would be a perfect kind of a solution for. And I think as well, Otis, like, I would say, we may not necessarily verbalize it, but like the main kind of stresses that people experience in life is because they don't understand each other, right? Mm-hmm. You say something, I don't really attribute kind of the intention behind your behavior, and then I get mad at you, and then we have to work together and we hate each other, et cetera, right? We've all been in those situations. I think like using AI as like a sounding board to kind of give you some insight into yourself and help you role play different conversations, kind of ask questions of, say, hey, Camden spoke to me like this, like what could he have meant, yada, yada, yada. Like all of a sudden we have kind of opened up coaching and feedback to people that would previously price out of it, or they may not even know that they need it, right? And I think that's the thing. Like if we make the interface right, which, kind of OpenAI did, by having like a really smooth kind of chat interface, people can kind of fall into those conversations much more seamlessly. So I think like, when we look at how do we get AI into people's lives, or how can AI benefit people more importantly, it's really about kind of helping people understand what problems it can solve and ultimately what things it can't. And I think that's kind of the thing to get right. Like I read this great article over the weekend in the New York Times, which was kind of saying how people were having like parasocial relationships with their AI. And some people,
myself,
and right, so people were like thinking, okay, like started talking about simulation theory, and then they were like, is this the Matrix? And it's like, what that's reflecting is like fundamentally like misunderstanding of like what is happening behind the screen, right? If we understood how these models are working, and I think they are very complicated, so we have some things to do to try and simplify that. And I can't say I understand everything that's happening either. But the more we can educate about the tool and technology, the better we can use it, because we understand where it excels and ultimately where it doesn't. And we don't fall into those kind of really sad kind of stories that were in the article about, people falling in love or getting depressed or kind of having mental health issues because of what the AI was kind of feeding back to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd say those people they had a propensity to have those problems anyways.
It's an accelerant at the end of the day. That kind of stuff. Yeah.
Exactly right. It's like I think this is exactly it, right? It's like the moral panic of this current generation is AI. Probably like before ChatGPT came out, social media was like the moral panic on children. It still is. I have some views about that. But then before that was video games, and so on and so on and so on. So it's like, these things are going to exaggerate tendencies that we already have. And so, it's up to us to try to understand them, to build the right safeguards, and also know, when and how to use them.
Yeah, well, you put my smart ass hat on, which it doesn't come off very often. You could say the same thing about FM radio. Wait, before that, what was there? AM radio. That rock and roll on the radio, you kids, devil. I mean, just destroying society, all these sort of things. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier. It's the disruption. And I think what's the true sense of it is learning how to use it properly to give you an advantage.
Agreed.
The one and something you said, I think this is a really key piece in it, is the human bias.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also the Google bias, which if you believe in that, which I tend to, I can avoid the Google bias by using a different tool. But back to the human bias, one of the things that in retrospect I've seen in the military is we promote people that are like us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And truthfully, it's not just the military, it's human nature. People that are like, oh, he's a lot like me. I really like that guy. I'm going to promote him because I see myself in him. And I'd love to talk about that capability of the tool to help somebody, business owners, as they're hiring positions, to, truly integrate diversification as opposed to he's just like me. That's why I like him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think if that's the red flag, right? If you hear someone say that, then probably it's a bad decision. I would say, okay. So there are a few ways to skin that cat. I would say right. So obviously algorithms in general, right? And this isn't like ChatGPT, but like any type of kind of algorithm, will reflect the data that it's like trained on. So garbage in, garbage out, is what to expect. So what that forces organizations to do is be more intentional about how it's collecting data, where and what types of data. Not all data is equal. And as well, it requires like a real kind of long-term commitment. Like these things can't be rushed. Like to get the right data, it takes time. And you kind of ultimately have to know like what are you trying to solve for with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then as well, it's about accepting, a degree of transparency and the risk that's going to go with that, right? So all we have to do when it comes to using AI or any sort of data in a decision point is being better than the baseline, which is human beings. Now, the challenge is we can look at an algorithm to kind of say how it's biased because we can open it up, we can study it, we can kind of test its effects. It's much harder for us to kind of do that with humans. So there's less kind of scrutiny on kind of human decision making and the bias that is inherent there than it is the algorithm. And so you could argue you are unfairly punishing algorithms because yes, they may be biased and we know they're biased, but are they less biased than the alternative, which is, the status quo? And I think, there's enough data to suggest that we're pretty bad at that period. And so we should be leaning more towards data. Now, of course, there are a million and one things we need to do to make sure that those algorithms are actually living to that promise. And this is like what a lot of our work is like helping organizations understand what is it that they're trying to predict. How do we get the right data? And then do tons of testing to show that the algorithm doesn't have what we call adverse impact and that it doesn't disproportionately harmly impact the success rates of different protected groups. And if you can do that right, which, once you get the machine running is definitely possible, but it does require a bit of a culture change, right? It requires a degree of humility. Like, I may be a good judge of talent, but I'm not the best, or I can be infallible. And, or even if I am good, I should go out and try to get some of the data to challenge my assumptions, right? And so going back to that kind of story from the New York Times, it's like kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. We can find the exact same things with kind of how we cherry pick data. So the way that to do it is like you have the same metrics that you apply to every single person. Each data point is weighted exactly the same across those different candidates. And then you're kind of hoping to be proven wrong. It's a cultural thing as well. Like some organizations are better than others. But it's certainly a journey. That's for sure.
How would you go about defining kind of the end boundary of that application? Meaning, it's like we kind of talk about, it's like, okay, we can do these things with this, how to get better with it. But then, there's a certain point where it's like the AI making all of the hiring decisions and these kind of things. It's like you shake your head like, okay, well, no, that's ridiculous now.
Yeah.
How do you define that end boundary? Because I think that's a really important piece of the application.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to know where, right? Machine learning, AI, data science, predictive modeling, whatever kind of term you want to use, it is it's all dealt on probabilities, not prophecies. And so where you find that edge is like one, being very clear around how accurate the model is. Does it explain, how much variation does it explain between the likelihood of two candidates being successful? Is it 5%? Is it 15%? Is it 100%? And very rarely are you going to see anything higher than, 15, 20% max. And so what that means is like you have to kind of use your own intuition and your own intelligence to make good judgment, to account for that other 80%. And so it's by no means perfect. But I think where it goes wrong is when humans get lazy, which we're prone to do, and just kind of hand everything over. And, we have this bias to kind of trust the machine. And we shouldn't trust the machines. Like every client I come to, if I have my model and I want them to challenge it. And I also want to be forthright in kind of tempering their expectations to know where the limitations are. And, then this is where it gets very murky as an industry because we're selling you a solution and I want to be able to take all your pain away and, just plug in here and I'm going to be able to answer all of your hiring questions. That's just not the case, right? It's just not going to work. And anyone that believes that, I feel like you need to kind of take a step back, read a couple of books, and kind of just refamiliarize, like ground yourself. Like we can't, like humans are infinitely complicated. All we can try to do is minimize the risk that you're making a bad decision. And that's as far as we can go, right? We're never going to be able to kind of read the tea leaves and give you 100% certainty. Mm-hmm. And that's the beautiful thing about kind of the AI age is like actually, I think it makes human judgment even more important because it's like, how can we synthesize what AI is saying, what we're viewing and our own lived experience to think about what the right decision is. That's always been a challenge, and even more so moving forward with, these new tools.
Well, I think what comes, go ahead, Ben.
I was just going to bring in the old personality test thing because that's one of my pet peeves that, a favorite of some businesses is the DISC profile, and they literally put your profile, on your door or your name placard on your desk or whatever. And it's like, God, for me, the irony of that is it's not racial, but it's definitely whatever the hell the right word would be, that kind of profiling, because you're just putting people in that box and saying, oh, well, you're
shortcutting it. It's biased decision based on shortcuts. Yeah.
And that's exactly, kind of goes back to what you were saying is we as humans get lazy. And really that was kind of the comment, but the follow-on to that is, have you seen or are you doing anything with the gazillion personality profiles and helping that? Because there is some sense, if I'm hiring for this type of position, and there is data out there that this type of personality would be a really good fit in that type of position.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, so not all personality models are like made equal, right? So you have you're going to have to cut me off if I start to kind of go too far down, like the pointy head kind of. This is my bread and butter for you listeners. Like I am a personality psychologist, like so I love assessments. I got my PhD, like studying, building these things. So cut me off when I go too far. But I can talk about this stuff forever. So I think so not all tests are made equally. And that is the result of kind of 2 or 3 different factors. Like I think the first factor is as to kind of what makes a good personality assessment is the framework or the way it conceptualizes personality, which is, are people a function of types? Like you are an extrovert or you are an introvert, et cetera, et cetera. Or are we a product of kind of interactions across different dimensions, right? If we think of extroversion and introversion on like one dimension and we fall somewhere in between that spectrum, right? There's a very different way of saying it. Like you can say I am more extroverted than introverted rather than saying I am one or the other. And so when we adopt a more dimensional view, it's again more nuanced. So it's it's harder to communicate. It's hard to put on your door because here's like a list of dimensions. You have to say I'm 80% this, 20% that, 57% this, right? That's not very sexy. That's not very easy to communicate. But when you do that, you actually get a model of personality that is actually much more predictive of on-the-job performance, whether that's leadership or all the way to kind of individual contributors. So I think that's the first thing, is like using a more what we call trait-based models. And the big 5 is like the framework that has the consensus of the scientific literature. It kind of views personality as a function of these 5 broad traits. It's based on language, the way we talk about people. And what's interesting is that when you try to recreate this model in different cultures, different languages, you see these 5 broad attributes emerge. Now, of course, personality is not prophecy. So while yes, there are going to be some environments where I'm, again, sticking with extroversion as the example, I feel more extroverted than others. there is going to be like a resting point. You're never going to see me be like an absolute introvert and an absolute extrovert, right? People have like an elastic band on their back, let's say, and they can kind of go up or down depending on what the situation requires.
Yeah, we all have that hey, I need to do this, and I can overcome that desire of, oh man, I just hate talking to people.
Yeah, precisely.
I think,
and it's like
I heard it once put, I think it was Richard Thaler, the behavioral economist, who called it like mood elasticity, where it's like there is just an elasticity there that's going to be naturally happening all the time.
Exactly. And some people have more flexibility than others, right? To move around that. But then the other point around it is like, how do you conceptualize that personality framework into a tool that is actually going to be reliable and that gives you consistent insights, and ultimately predicts, the things that you're most interested in at work, which is, is this person going to be a good collaborator? Are they going to be able to think and solve complex problems? Are they going to innovate, et cetera, et cetera? And so the way that you do that is by, collecting lots of data, carefully wording the questions that you ask people so they're not obvious, getting data from lots of different situations, different industries, different cultures to ensure that you're capturing the full variability of human nature. And then doing lots of what we call validation studies, like having people complete these surveys while also getting ratings on their performance or asking their peers to evaluate them, like how people see themselves, does it correlate with how other people see them, so on and so forth. And so once you've done that, you've got this really rich body of evidence that's both empirical and theoretical, so that if you are using assessments, you can, make better decisions on them. They're not going to be perfect decisions, but they're going to be better decisions. The correlation between personality and performance at work is kind of around, I would say, 0.3. So it explains around like 10 to 15% of the variance. If I was to measure two people's personality, there'd be about 15% overlap that would explain the likelihood of being successful at work. And so when you think about that, right, okay, that means there's like 85% unaccounted for. But if you combine that with, a structured interview that's like tightly scored, if I take that into account with your resume, with your life experience, et cetera, you can start to build a bigger picture and account for more of that variance. And again, it's all about kind of mitigating the unknowns and kind of challenging what you do think about a candidate. And you're looking for kind of counterfactuals to Otis, to your point, is to kind of challenge some of that bias you may be bringing to that judgment about a candidate. Mm-hmm. One last point, and then I'll stop rambling about personality science.
You're tempted to go.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really holding it back.
That lecture energy in you, man.
I would say, like, counter to all of that, right? You have to think about, like, what problem are you trying to solve? And so I think some of my colleagues may disagree with me here in that you mentioned DISC, MBTI is like another one that doesn't necessarily have, it's not built on the 5-factor model. So it doesn't have maybe as much, scientific peer-reviewed research behind it as, say, the 5-factor does. But if you are looking to facilitate a conversation where we're just here talking about how I view myself, how I view you, and vice versa, and what we can do differently, one camp would say, well, even if you're going to have that conversation, you should make sure it's based on scientific valid data. And like, I get that. If I was to try to make hiring decisions off it, of course I wouldn't do that. But I think you can throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think what's more important is that, we're getting together as a team to talk about our communication, to talk about empathy, to talk about understanding, in which case, I couldn't care what tool you use. I'd just rather you have the conversation. It only becomes problematic if you're actually making real hiring, promotion, staffing decisions, in which case, you want to have that evidence to support your decisions. And I'll stop. That's my lecture done for today. Sorry, thank you for entertaining me.
I think it's all great, really, really useful stuff. The question that I was kind of thinking about there is, when it comes to application, we even actually at the beginning you talked about it's like not going to be utopian or dystopian. I'm seeing a picture of a dystopia that's starting to get painted, and I'm not going to go fully down the rabbit hole like Terminator stuff, but they're the same way we talked about the folks who may go on ChatGPT and start thinking that they're God or that they're in a relationship with it or whatever weird stuff can happen with that. And we're kind of, those people are going to find ways to be crazy no matter what tool you give them. Crappy bosses are going to find ways to be crappy bosses no matter what tools you give them. And all of these biases and things that you're talking about avoiding, I can totally see how some big business would go, hey, it's a great idea for us to just lock all this in, get rid of managers, just AI and all these kind of things. And it creates that really nasty example of it. What's your take on that? Because I see how it's getting a little bit dystopian and I'm running with the idea a little bit there. But at the same time, that seems like a decently realistic outcome that people are going to take this the wrong way.
Completely agree. And that is happening. There are organizations that have fired a whole bunch of staff and tried to replace them with AI. And in fact, many of those organizations now decided to walk back those decisions and hire back staff. I would say the dystopia of AI is more what you've just described, Camden, right? And I would say it's the boring dystopian future, which is using AI to kind of create more job insecurity, to erode workers' rights, to erode our ability to provide for our families and to thrive in society, right? And so that, I think, is this race to the bottom mentality, I think, is actually far more likely than a Terminator-style, apocalypse. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean, right? I think you're absolutely right in that bad bosses, bad actors are always going to exist. And I think actually it's the onus on your listeners that are leading their teams to role model the right behaviors, right? Creating systemic changes, is hard and feels like next to impossible. What we can do is kind of change the relationships, the communities that we're a part of by one good action at a time, and just trying to act with integrity, act with intelligence, and be as compassionate and rational as possible. I know that's kind of wishy-washy, but I think it really is true. It's kind of core leadership principles. How do you what kind of norms are you establishing? And then, we can only hope that then the people that, rise through the ranks and our decision makers can bring this stuff into their decision making when they're thinking about their organizational strategy. They don't just view, oh, why not I just gut the entire customer service department and replace it with AI, but rather think, wow, how much more successful could my organization be if I gave everyone in my customer service team access to this super intelligent, amazing AI? How can I 10x their impact and make their lives better, make our customers' lives better, et cetera, et cetera? That feels far more exciting. And requires a broader vision to think about what else is possible rather than, great, I'm just going to fire everyone and just save a couple of bucks. That I feel is really boring. I get why people do it. I understand that. But I just think, we could be innovating and having a bigger impact on our customers, our stakeholders, and so on, if it was using AI to augment rather than just replace. So,
Well, what you made me think of is the fundamentals of success will still be there.
Correct.
Having a clear vision, having the right culture, understanding how to lead people, that goes back to what you were saying earlier, the human dynamic that will, AI truly cannot replace that piece of it. And I think it's the dilemma that we want to be naturally lazy, and the survival, here's your justification for being lazy, and the survival instinct of it. And what's the easiest path? Well, if I just say, how do I make a team great so that my business can be successful? And we put that into ChatGPT, and then we just do whatever it's saying. It ain't gonna work.
No, of course not.
Actually, it's just like a question I'd written down, Dad, and to kind of summarize that, Reece, how do you tell the difference between the shortcut versus a boost? Because if you're looking for shortcuts all the time, that's how you wind up like those bad bosses we talked about. But those boosts are there to help everyone else.
I'd say it comes back down to your values, right? What are you trying to achieve, right? Organizations are more than technology. And if we're looking to automate our lives away, then what are we actually going to achieve? What are we going to do with all that time, resource, capacity that we have to realize our values? So as a leader, like, what are you here to achieve? What is your mission? Okay, let's work back from that. And if you don't have a clear mission or vision, then it's going to be much easier to kind of go down the road that you just described, Camden, which is like, let's look for shortcuts, because really you're maybe incentivized by kind of short-term gains. Totally understand if that's your values. But if you want to have an impact on things, you kind of have to take a broader look. In which case, that means sacrificing some of these short-term gains and give people a chance to kind of level up, because, you're going to be on the precipice of achieving something much bigger. And I think that's, it's hard to find. I think my colleague, my co-founder, Tomas Chamorro, writes a lot about kind of incompetent leaders. And so I highly recommend to your listeners to check some of his stuff out. But it's like, like resisting leaders that are charismatic and narcissistic and kind of self-serving, which they're all very seductive. Those three qualities, we love voting for them. But actually it's about kind of promoting or choosing leaders that can communicate a real vision that is positive for the world, its communities, its stakeholders, and going from there. But that's,
yeah. The other thing that's coming to mind, talking about your work with the personality test, I think this is a great example of this. The idea of bridging the theory with the data. I've talked about this before on the show. Like I mentioned Richard Thaler, the behavioral economist. These kind of things where it's like, hey, I got all this modeling here and so much psychology, and you get into like neuroeconomics now and all these kind of things where it's like it is. They're getting real close to building that bridging that theory to application and all that. But also there's this part of me every time with one of those, it's like there's always going to be a gap there, that there is something fundamental that you can't completely cross. There is a human component, I think, to what you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
What's your interpretation on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's like, what is it in engineering? Like the last mile problem. It's like when you're trying to optimize distribution networks and so on, it's like always the very last leg of the trip. That's the hardest. And I would say that's true here, right? Like we can build great tools, we can give people the right data, but ultimately it comes down to the application of it, and that's a motivational problem. So when deeper signals, when we work with an enterprise, for a development program, let's say everyone will complete our assessments, they'll get access to these reports, they can go on these development journeys. But unless like someone is really intrinsically motivated to grow and become a better version of themselves, unless there's a giant stick above their heads, they're not going to participate. And so again, it goes back down to kind of leadership and culture. Are we able to create a condition whereby, one, I'm communicating a compelling vision. Two, I've selected people that share that vision, and three, are highly motivated to execute on it. And if I don't have those things, then to your point, Camden, like you're still going to have that gap, and I can give you the best tools in the world, but you're never going to use them because you either don't know either the leader hasn't told you what we're here to achieve. Two, I don't know what that is, or three, I don't even care. And any combination of those things is just going to kind of run into roadblocks. So again, Otis, it goes to your point. It's always about the fundamentals. Everything else kind of builds up from there.
Yeah, and I think that's what I learned. I was reminded of is how important that is. You can't shortcut it. I mean, it is, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And there's a reason we use that phrase all the time in special ops, in sports. We used it all the time in rugby because the fundamentals have to be there. And without the fundamentals of understanding, having a true understanding of your business purpose, vision, and values, AI ain't going to tell you. It may give you some suggestions, but it can't do it for you. And I think that's one of the beauties of this. As much as folks are trying to leap ahead, you can't. You still got to.
Yeah.
I'm flashing back to rugby coaching and how what we did was always the fundamentals: catch, pass, run, catch, pass, run. And all the other teams we played against were trying to do all these other fancy things,
Mm-hmm.
and they never mastered the catch, pass, run. And that's why they were never successful.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the way I'm starting to think of AI. Hell, and I'll share one more piece of that as a validation.
Mm-hmm.
Is if you don't truly understand the problem set that you're asking for help on, you can't get an answer for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Completely
So
agree.
it's how good do I understand what is going on, and how well can I explain and define the problem to ask the question? What does that person that I need your help with hiring really, really look like?
Yeah.
That's asking a lot. So
yeah, completely agree.
Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, really, for me, same kind of vein. It's how much, and it's almost annoying, it's how much of this is like communication on a core level, and just being able to communicate, like you're saying, asking the right questions, being able to analyze things properly, and just communicate that. And I think that's an interesting piece. Like I said, almost a little annoying because it's like, oh, come on, it's back to communication again. Gosh, the old high school English teacher was right, all those kind of things. But at the same time, that to me paints a nice picture of the lack of the dystopia, I guess, and how it's like there's always going to be this point there because it's like that communication, bridging that gap. There's always going to be a human connection there that has to bridge that gap, and that comes back to fundamentals of leadership and communication. And I think that's a encouraging thing, I guess, if you're ever going down that rabbit hole of dystopian AI. Think about that.
Reece, how about you, man? What'd you learn?
Yeah, so I think it is about fundamentals. And I think, the dystopian part of this, or the dysfunction, let's say, is like we're always looking to shortcut them. That's why we have why technology probably hasn't lived up or kind of addressed the problems that we had hoped it to do. And I think AI is no different here. Otis, you mentioned, it's about being able to think critically, think deeply. If you don't have that ability, you're going to struggle. AI is going to tell you things, but you don't really know how to interpret it. And so I think it's, a really nice framing. Like fundamentals can't be changed. You can't shortcut them, no matter how hard or how seductive it may seem. You have to focus on those things first. The technology ultimately comes afterwards. So, it's a really nice framework that you've shared.
Awesome. Reece, how do folks find you, learn more about what y'all got going on?
Yeah, so my LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me. I post all sorts of things about psychology, leadership, AI, and everything in between. And as well, you can check out my company's page, which is deepersignals.com. You can learn a little bit more about our assessment tools and how we use AI to help organizations with their talent decisions.
Awesome. Reece, man, it's been a pleasure and a lot of deep thinking going on, and how this tool that's supposed to make life easier makes it harder because you got to do the hard work still. So
exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to listening to future episodes.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank y'all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Reece Akhtar, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass it along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, that full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.